Hey everyone, in today's video, we're taking a look at this very interesting Sansui QR1500. This one showed up locally. It's the same person that had that old Harman Kardon receiver. I can't even remember the model name of it right now, but he really has a way of bringing things to my bench that I've never seen or heard of before. And it's consistently like kind of lower level models that like aren't big watts per channel, but they're just different. They're just quirky and weird. So this is certainly no exception. This appears to be a bottom of the line, very early quadraphonic receiver by Sansui, rated at 15 watts per channel. If you look at the face, you see there's not too many controls on here. It looks a little complex, but it's really quite simple. There's very few things to mess around with here. But what is available to mess around with, particularly these two switches, is very interesting. So I want to show you a closer up look of this thing. We'll take a look and get a feel for it before we turn it on. I get so many of you complaining about how I hold the camera so shaky, so I'll use the tripod for this to try and help you folks out. So if we take a look up front here, we've got some pretty simple controls, and especially down here, we see we've got the classic social security number engraving on the receiver. That was a common thing to do back in the 70s. I don't know the origins of it quite, but I know somebody in the comments does. We've got a signal meter, but no centering tuning meter. Front and rear phones, that's pretty interesting. Got an FM stereo indicator, bass, treble, loudness, tape monitor, and here's where it gets interesting. We've got these mode and selector switches. So as you can see, we've got a 4-channel aux, 2-channel aux, and then we've got some modes. We've got quarter turn, half turn, front rear, normal. Very interesting. I've listened to this a little bit prior, so I can't quite give you the full thrill of seeing it for the first time with you, but that's one thing the customer noted is it sounds different in 2-channel versus 4-channel, so let's try and see if that's normal or if that's just an issue. And then for the volume, we have 2 sliders, one for the front and one for the rear. Sansui QR1500 4-channel receiver. You can also see it's very wide. This is not your typical package for a receiver. Let's flip around to the back here. In the back we have more simplicity. There's not too much. We've got inputs for 2-channel and 4-channel, antennas, and then all 4 speakers. Another thing that's very interesting about this receiver that I noticed is that on the side here it is labeled 220 volts. So what that means is there's a chance that this receiver got here from overseas at some point. I don't know the history on it, obviously, otherwise I'd tell you. But I looked in the back and this has been switched over to 120 volts. So it's ready to go for this country, this region, North America. So now let's go ahead and turn it on because it does look very cool when it's turned on. I'll turn off this light so we can get a better view of this. And I just love the way these old Sansuis look in their coloring. It's a very, very deep green. And I can tell you that it's much deeper in person than it is on camera. It looks a little bit more washed out on camera. You know, the lights just do weird things with these cameras here, so it's much greener in person. I want to show you the one issue that I know about. If we look right here, you can see there's like a little 2 right there. And that's great and all, but let me show you the knob there. If I switch this to 4-channel, that turns into a little 4. And I've had this apart. That 2 shows up because the light bulb is working, but I think it's something mechanical inside where the light path is just not able to get to the 2. So we're going to have to figure that out. And the other thing noted by the customer is the distortion in 4-channel mode. So let's get some speakers hooked up, let's listen to everybody's favorite song and take a listen. So we are in 4-channel mode, and we are running through the front speakers. It sounds okay. But if we switch into 2-channel mode, it just sounds better. So I'm running it at max max volume right there, and you know, when I switch, 4-channel just sounds kind of bad. I don't know what's up with that. It could be an issue with the amplifiers. It could just be how it is in 4-channel mode. So I'm not too sure about that. I also can't properly test this because I don't have 4 test speakers. Maybe I should get another pair. You know, I think I can bring back an old friend that all you OG AH fixitors are gonna know. I think one of the most common questions in the old videos is, what speaker is that? It is a KLH-17. Is that in view? Maybe, I don't know. It's always been a KLH-17 until I moved to this place and got the Sony speakers. Clearly I need to redesign my bench to work with quadraphonic receivers, but I'm not gonna do that because I don't like them. But Aiden, why don't you like quadraphonic receivers? They're so cool. Yeah, they're cool as hell. I think they're super cool, but they're a pain in my butt. Look what I'm doing right now. Do you really want to have a test bench with 4 speakers on it? Do you really want to have to rebuild the same circuit 4 times instead of 2? I don't. I don't like doing that. So, you're all listening through one microphone, but I'm going to have to tell you what I'm hearing once I start playing music again through 4 speakers. I played around with the speakers in this configuration for a little bit, but I'm going to revisit this later in the video because I have better things to say later on. I didn't have too many good things to say here, so let's just continue where I stopped talking about it. Let's give the FM radio a whirl with our professional antenna. Turn the volume down, and let's go to FM auto. Yep. That works great. Yeah, you can see that it's picking up a lot of stations. We're getting FM stereo. And signal meter is traveling an appropriate amount for the kind of antenna we're running here. This is 103.1 and it's at about 103, so that's good. Yeah, happy to report that the FM radio works great. You can see we're picking up lots of stations with just a piece of wire. Signal strength meter works, FM stereo light works. Good stuff. So at this point I'd like to take this apart and show you the inside, and that's how we're going to get to understanding why this light isn't working. So let's do that real quick. This is one of the more painful receivers to take apart because it doesn't have a cover, it has a case, and you gotta slide it out of the case. Which is fine, but you know, I had to disconnect all my wires for all 4 speakers. Now I did have a question from a viewer recently where they kind of asked me, like, how do you know? Like, how do you know what the hell you are looking at in this thing? So I will go through that briefly with you with this. So you've got a few basic things. You've got a power supply, you've got a preamplifier, you've got power amplifiers, and then you've got a tuner. So what I see here is we have 2 power amplifiers, and I'll show you how I know they're a power amplifier. One, I know that this is a capacitor coupled amplifier design just because of how it's behaving and how I can hear it, and there's definitely no protection relay. These 2 capacitors right here, I'm pretty sure are the coupling capacitors for each channel. Right, left for front and rear. So this is either the front or rear amplifier, and then this is either the front or rear amplifier. I don't know. They're also little modules. You see they come out with that little connector there? And I know the power amplifier because we've got output transistors, 2 per channel. 1, 2, and 1, 2, and you got a little sensing guy right there to control the bias. And that just looks to me like a classic power amplifier module. This board, I don't really know. It's very interesting. And then, under somewhere, where was it? Yeah, right under this module right here, I can see a large filter capacitor, but just one. And that also, to me, indicates that it is capacitor coupled, because you only need one positive DC rail for a capacitor coupled amplifier. You don't need a positive and negative. If there were another one of those, which there is not under here. This board is obviously the tuner board because you've got like these little metal alignment thingy-mabobbers, and you've got the main tuner cap, the front end. soldered directly to this board. So this is obviously the tuner board. And then there's one more circuit board under this one. Can't quite see it, but if I had to guess, that'd be the preamplifier because it's got wires coming out of it going toward all these controls and stuff in here. Now, let's go to that light I was talking about. I'm going to show you some things, unless she makes too much noise and we can't hear anything. Are you okay? Are you okay, kitten? Are you going to be okay? Okay. Hey! How are you? So like I said, let's turn this on. If we switch between 2 and 4, you can kind of see that there's like a little outline of a 2 there, but it's not quite there. But the 4 definitely works. Now, let's flip this around and let's check out the lights in the back. Right there, we've got 2 light bulbs turned on. One for that 4 and the other for that synthesizer indicator. So let's turn the synthesizer indicator off just so this is a little bit more clear. So that's now turned off. Now, let's switch between 2 and 4. So that's 2, and that's 4, and that's 2, and that's 4. So light is traveling somehow off to the side via this thing to shine through that 2 thing instead of the 4 thing. So the light bulb works. That's fine. We just need to figure out why the light isn't getting to the 2. So I'm going to take off the faceplate and go from there. This one does not want to come off. That could be bad. I've never tried this before, but I'm going to be very delicate. Holy crap. Jeez. Now you don't want to pry, because you'll probably break this little plastic right here. Hey, there we go. So that got it. Just a little bit more heat. Came right off. Okay, now we need to undo these nuts. They all happen to be finger tight. Maybe? Okay, 2 of them were finger tight. The other one wasn't. Who wants to watch me do the wrong thing? Let's do the wrong thing. Yep, there we go. Don't do the wrong thing, folks. Only do it if you're a professional. And we'll take these screws off here. Wow, it's like a little hook. Very bizarre. Alright, what are we hung up on? Aha! Very interesting. We've got ourselves a little setup here. Weird. I mean, check this thing out. You know, we go to 4, it says 4. You know, synthesizer says synthesizer. And then somehow light is supposed to get diffused to the side there in order to make that 2 light up green, and I'm not exactly comfortable taking this apart because that is glued together. I do not know what to do here. Alright, call me a wimp, call me lame or whatever, but I've made a decision to just leave this alone because I don't really see me taking this apart going well. I don't see the end result being any better than what it is now. You know, this is 50-year-old glue and plastic, and I think it's best if I just, you know, leave it alone. And that's just unfortunately a symptom of this receiver's age. That being said, I do think you should run it in 4-channel mode, as I'm about to explain in a minute here. I've created a new setup. This is my new quadraphonic test setup. The KG4s are just stands. We've got the KLH-17s on either side. So I can stand right in here, and I can hear from all 4 corners. So, it actually sounds really cool when you're playing with the mode switches. I'll try to portray that in a minute here. what I want to do right now is run some power tests with this thing, get out the scope, run a sine wave through each side, and just see what's going on. Are we getting 15 watts per channel at each end or not? So I'm going to set that up real quick. So it's not quite easy to get this all in shot, but what we've got right now is the front speakers hooked up to the scope with our 8 ohm load resistors. We're reading across the left speaker just to get a voltage, and we've got a 1 kilohertz sine wave going through. So let's bring up the front volume right here, this slider, and let's see where we start clipping. So there's clipping right about there. Let's bring it down. Got about 10 volts AC. That's like just under 15 watts per channel. So that's about right. Now let's switch to the rear speakers and see what we're getting out of that amplifier, because it's a different amplifier. So here we are. And by the way, we're in 2-channel front and rear mode. So let's bring up the rear speakers. Bring it down. Just about 10 volts. So, you know, a little bit under the 15 it's rated for. Not really sure what to think of that, but as far as I'm concerned, this is close enough to spec. I'm not seeing any behavior that's like, you know, really bad. So now what I want to do is, you know, we're running this near its maximum, you know, at about 8 volts. And what I'm curious to see is when I switch to quadraphonic mode. Okay, now that's very interesting. See, this is kind of what's going on with this receiver here. This synthesizer button really changes the way things work. Like if I take this out, we're back to about 9 volts, but then when I put it back in, it basically cuts the voltage in half. And that's because what this synthesizer button is doing is it's running the signal through this board over here that makes a lot of big changes. It's supposed to make it sound kind of like a concert hall. I encourage you to download the service manual for this thing from Hi-Fi Engine just to read what it says about all these switches and buttons here, because it's really interesting how the synthesizer thing works in 4-channel mode. If we go back to 2-channel mode, you know, actually that's really weird. If you notice, we're in phase right here in 2-channel stereo mode, and then it swaps the phase on one of them. If we do the quarter turn, okay, so that's really odd. It really starts to not be too happy about that. But, you know, we're still hitting that 15 watts per channel, as you can see. Like, even though we're in, you know, 4-channel mode right here, we got phase swapped on one speaker. We still get about the 10 volts, but then if I go quarter turn, it'll max out the 1 and change its phase. And if we do half turn, it changes phase on the other. And the 1 is peaking out real hard. So this is really, really bizarre. So, you know, the customer stated, like, you know, it doesn't sound very good in 4-channel mode sometimes. Well, I think that it's just because in 4-channel mode, it's simply being overdriven. And we see evidence of this, and we know that really nothing's wrong. It's just something in the circuitry overdoes it. So that's really weird. Nothing's wrong with this. It's just kind of the way it is the point I'm trying to make here. Let's try that with the front speakers, switching these switches, because I think that's going to be really interesting. So we're switched over. It does treat the front speakers differently, you know. So now let's play with our front slider. And here we are in 4-channel mode with the synthesizer. We're hitting our 9-ish volts, full power. And again, the synthesizer button, I was going to say, when the synthesizer button is pushed in, or pushed out, I guess, it sounds okay. But then it sounds bad when you push it in. And okay, so this right here, that might be an actual issue. You see, we've got a clipped sine wave at the top, right there. I'd call that an actual problem. That shouldn't be happening. Unless it's something with the decode thing, I don't know. And that's a preamp issue. I don't think that's a power amp issue. So now let's go to the quarter turn. Yep, maxes the one out, and then at half turn, it swaps the phase on the two. So I don't really know what to think of all this. This is very, very bizarre how this receiver works, I gotta say. Then when we're in 2-channel mode, everything's fine. You know, you got the fronts. When you're at rear, it cuts it out. The only real issue here is when I have the decoder button pushed in, we have a weird clip on the sine wave at the top on each speaker. And it looks like that happens in all 4-channel modes. Except for half turn. Why is it that in half turn, it doesn't do that? I don't know, folks. That is a very, very specific issue that I think would be that right there. I think that's a lot of time to figure that out. I don't know what that could be. Probably a bad capacitor or bad transistor on the synthesizer board here. So that's a lot of pretty crazy and obscure stuff I just played around with and showed you right there. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is in some modes, the preamp just gets louder and it starts overdriving the amplifier. The only issue I can actually see, and it might not even be an issue, I feel like I could totally rebuild one of these boards that's maybe happening at, and it would be just fine still. I feel like, you know, when you have decoder turned on and you're in normal 4-channel mode, you get that weird little clip on the sine wave. I don't know what that is, and given the nature of what the customer asked me to do here, that's just a lot of time that I would have to spend figuring that out for, I think, very little gain. The rest of this receiver works exceptionally well. If you want to do 4-channel mode, just put it in synthesizer. And honestly, that's best for today because you can't really get true 4-channel stuff anymore. It's kind of hard to do. When you use that synthesizer button, it basically creates a 4-channel-like sound. It adds a little bit of reverb to the rear speakers. As you saw, it took the amplitude down a little bit too as we switched between the two and the rear speakers. So I'd call this thing working just fine. It's all original, and that's kind of one thing I like about these lower model receivers is they're not very powerful, so none of the components are very stressed, and they just don't break easily, right, Sadie? She's bothering me. You may have seen her shaking the camera earlier. What do you think? Are you going to fix the decode function? Or do you not really know what to do just like me? I don't think she really knows what to do. Also, I would try to set the bias on these amplifiers, but there is no instructions in the service manual. And in addition to that, the pins on these power amplifier modules, they're not marked in the service manual either, so I really don't know what I'm looking at. None of them are really hot, so I'm not really concerned, and like I said, everything sounds great and it's performing mostly as it should. So I've got this thing reassembled. I'm going to use the camera's microphone since it records in stereo, and I'm going to show you how it sounds different as you switch through the different modes. I'll leave it on the tripod so we can get, you know, better comparison. I will put on one of our favorite songs, and I will switch through the mode switch, and you'll get to hear what's going on. So that's the front speakers only. We're in 2-channel front and rear. I'll turn on the rear speakers. It probably doesn't sound very different. Baby, you give me now, let's go to 4-channel mode. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. Now, you whip up my appetite. With decoder pushed in, that's when it sounds worse. Oh, synthesizer just kind of mellows it out. If we listen to just the rears right now, I switch back to normal, or 2-channel. It's doing quite a bit. Now let's do the quarter turn and the half turn. I think it's best right there. So I hope you were able to hear some kind of difference in that. I'll have to check in the editing, but that's about it for this thing. It really didn't need much, it just needed some things explained of its functionality, and if it were a different situation I might do a deep dive into why we're seeing that weird clipping when the decoder is turned on. But that's not really what we're trying to do right here. We're just going through this thing, making sure it's working, you know, mostly as it should. You know, I know I'm having a hard time defending myself with that, but it doesn't need much of anything. Yeah, I could use a recap like all this stuff could, but the point is it's working. So once it actually needs more work, maybe that can be considered. But for now, this thing's A-okay. And it sounds really cool and it sounds really fun. I really enjoyed getting a chance to play with this little switch here, getting my quadraphonic test set up here and checking this thing out. So also, it didn't even need the controls cleaned. I just showed you everything is working just fine, no static, so I didn't even clean the controls. So this is just going straight back to the customer. So with that, thank you so much for watching. If you like videos on this stuff, be sure to subscribe because that's kind of what we do here on this channel. So thanks again. I'll see you in the next one.